Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, Life, Law, Bin. Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's great to see you guys again. This is the final installment in the Pupillage Workshop series. So thanks to everyone who's been keeping abreast of the episodes. This is top tips for securing a common law pupillage. And I do have a really familiar face with me today, and it is Grace Atkinson. So welcome, Grace. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me on. I think it's a really great workshop that you've been doing, and I feel very privileged that you've asked me to join. So thank you, Nia.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks for obviously accepting. It wouldn't have been possible without my special guests deciding to come and share their information. Now, for those of you who don't know, Grace and I serve together on the Association of Grazing Students committee. So she was a fantastic social secretary. She did manage to get us out of that lockdown period, and we were actually able to come and celebrate in person at an in-person event. So thanks for that, Grace. I'm sure that that has definitely gone down into the memories of ageist students. And we always do this, so I'm not going to forget. Let's talk about Grace's fun fact. She did a 5-day Salcante trek to Machu Picchu a couple years ago. That's exciting, Grace. How was that? How did you find that?
Oh, it was the most amazing thing I've ever done. I mean, having said that, it was hard work. I think we walked about 100 kilometers in 5 days. But obviously, when you're doing that at altitude, it was really difficult, but one of the most, if not the most amazing thing I've ever done. So, highly recommend it if anyone ever gets the opportunity.
Oh, that's splendid. I think the most I'll do is probably run on the treadmill for 10, 15 minutes and play some volleyball.
Yeah.
So hats off to you and that one. I think someone would have, they probably would have had to turn back with me.
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
Yes, definitely. I can see myself just saying, bye guys, I'm turning around. Well, we have to know our limitations. So let's
Mm.
get cracking. Let's just tell our viewers today a little bit about yourself, starting with a brief introduction into your journey into law. So we'd like to know about your first degree and obviously your bar course. So let's get going.
Yeah, okay, of course. So I'm from a little town in West Yorkshire called Halifax. And in 2017, I level results and decided to study law for my undergraduate degree. And I moved to Durham. So I did that at Grey College with Durham University. And I just had the most amazing time there, to be honest. College for starters, it was a wonderful place. But in terms of the actual law degree, I can't fault it really. Having 3 years to explore many areas of the law on top of the more conventional and compulsory modules that you study, it helped me to gain a really good understanding of how the law works in different areas of society. So I really, really enjoyed my time there. And don't get me wrong, I was not the perfect law student. I think anyone in Durham could vouch for that. I wasn't great at going to all of my lectures, for example, but I was a really hard independent worker, which I think is important when you're a law student and especially when you become a barrister. So definitely had a great time. And then I went straight on to doing my bar course, and I did that with BPP London Herborn. And I found that a challenging experience, especially during the midst of a pandemic. I'm sure you'll agree, Nia, as most people who did the bar course during the pandemic would, that It's not easy. It's not easy when you don't get the opportunity to go to university, meet friends, build kind of a support network of people going through the same thing. So I felt I missed out on that. But at the same time, I'm very proud of my achievements, as I think anyone who did any form of studying during the pandemic should be. And yeah, I look back and I had a great time. I chose the common law stream on the bar course when we got to choose our pathways, and feel like it really did place me in good stead for pupillage. I notice a lot of the skills that I'm using at the moment, I learned directly on the bar course and can track them back to certain workshops where we were taught those skills. And yeah, I should probably also mention that I got 2 scholarships from Gray's Inn, which I'm eternally grateful for. One of them went towards funding the overall cost of the bar course for me, which was just the most amazing thing. And then the second was a residential scholarship. So during my time on the bar course, I was able to live and study at Gray's Inn in London, which was phenomenal, as I'm sure anyone could imagine. Very fortunate to have been able to do that. Again, strange during a pandemic because there weren't that many people around, but you can't complain about that experience. And the people that I did get to meet were just fantastic and so supportive of me. So yeah, I was then called to the bar in July last year on what was probably the hottest day of the year. Not what you want when you're having your photo taken in a wig and a gown. And yeah, I'm now in the first 6 of my common law pupillage with Day Street Barristers based in Newcastle.
So you return to the north. It's
Yeah,
clearly.
I have an affinity to the northeast, which definitely started from Durham. So yeah, moved back there now, and I just think it's an amazing place. I know you agree with me, Nia, that
100%.
Newcastle is a wonderful city.
It's lovely, and there's no other city really like it, you know. It's only especially after
No,
you know, step away to probably spend a little time somewhere else. You actually recognize it's unique. It's absolutely unique, and the people are pretty wonderful there as well. They're quite friendly. And we can't
very
say
friendly.
that, yeah, we can't say that for the entire UK because there's some persons that are so impersonal. I find London to be, you know, quite impersonal. Um, you know, you feel a lot more comfortable asking a question in Newcastle, asking for directions, that kind of thing. But
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
yeah, you did mention something there that I think was really relevant. The fact that we were on lockdown or in the middle of a pandemic when we were studying. And I think that's what made our experience, for example, on Aegis, such a lovely one. Because although we met via Zoom most of the time, and then obviously that culminated into the final meeting in person at that fantastic event that you organized, but it still gave me at least as kind of a sense of a community because we all knew we were in the same boat, more or less at different institutions. But I do agree with you. I do feel as though we were deprived a bit of getting to know more of our colleagues on our course. So in terms of what you said there, I definitely do agree. Now, in terms of pupillage, can you outline any work experience, and that could be either legal or non-legal, that you believed aided your applications?
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably worth starting with what really got me interested in the law. And I mention it because I talked about it a lot in my pupillage application. So I do feel it's really relevant, even though it stems from me being quite young. So none of my family went to university. Well, none of my immediate family went to university, and none of them pursued legal careers. But my grandma did become a magistrate in the criminal courts in Halifax. And she used to pick me up from school when I was quite young, and she'd tell me stories about the cases that she'd been listening to that day, obviously in child appropriate friendly language. But it must have stuck with me because I can see that's where my passion for the law really stemmed from, and from being about 14 years old, which I believe is the age you can enter a public gallery, in a courtroom. I would go and watch things in the magistrates' court. And yeah, that was an important experience that I got to talk about in pupillage applications, because I could pinpoint a moment that influenced me. But I think also on top of that, it's an important experience because it gave me the motivation to go on and get the further experience that I did. So yeah, that's where it all started, really, I should say. But then if we move on to more direct legal experiences that you'd associate with applying for pupillage, I think the most obvious one that comes to mind is mini pupillages. If anyone's applying for pupillage, they'll know about them and probably will have done them. So I only ever did 3 mini pupillages. And I say only, I probably shouldn't say only, because I still got pupillage. So one of my mini pupillages was with Day Street, which is obviously where I've ended up. I don't think you can get around the fact that if you've done a mini pupillage with a chambers you're applying for, that is advantageous. It shows that you're interested in them and it shows that you've had some experience with them. But I think a piece of advice I'd give to people applying at the moment is that chambers will be aware how difficult it's been during the pandemic. They're aware that a lot of places have stopped offering mini pupillages, or they've only had virtual ones available. And it's not the be all or end all having a long list of mini pupillages on your CV. Don't get me wrong, if you can do a couple, if you can do a few, that's really good. And I highly recommend it because they are important. But as I just said, it's not the be all and end all. And if there's one set that you particularly have your heart set on, you really, really know you want to practice there, then try your best to get a mini pupillage there, but don't panic about it, I think is the main message I'm trying to send, because I've spoken to a lot of people who do, and I don't think it is the most important thing in the world. If you've done some, that's great, but a long list of them isn't always necessary. And then other legal experiences, I think, include things like working in a solicitor's firm. So I worked as an intern in 2 solicitors' firms. One of them was a smaller one in Halifax. Another one was a bigger one in Leeds. I didn't attain those through vacation schemes. I just wrote to them and applied. They said, yeah, come along for a few weeks, that'll be fine. And I think those experiences were important because not only did they enable me to allow me to understand the dynamic between solicitors and barristers, which is always going to be advantageous to you when you're talking about that in a pupillage interview, but it also allows me to talk about why I want to be a barrister, if that makes sense. I can describe an experience I've had in another area of law, in another career, and I can say, yeah, that was great, but I realise that my skills are better suited to the ones of being a barrister. And I think that can be really helpful in your applications. It shows you've really explored all areas and routes for you. And in terms of other employment, I don't really have much. I think you'll meet people at the bar who were previously employed as paralegals. That's often the case, or other legal roles. But I never went down that route. And in fact, the extent of my employment was working part-time in a bar for a few years. But I don't underestimate the value that can add to my applications, because it's a part of who I am. It's helped me develop my interpersonal skills. It's highly relevant to what I do. It's directly dealing with clients and speaking to people all day, really. So I was even able to talk about that. I wouldn't underestimate things that you might overlook in your applications because you don't think they're entirely relevant. Then I think the last real significant experience I had, which you've already mentioned, Nia, was working on the Aegis committee, which is obviously how we met. I think being a part of that committee, it allowed me to show that I had a real commitment to the bar. When I was discussing what I'd been doing in pupillage interviews, they were really quite interested to see that I had such high involvement with my Inns of Court. And obviously, I was able to point out skills that I'd used. So I'd been planning online events in the middle of a pandemic. That wasn't easy. I had to have really good organizational skills. I was able to talk about that. But also just being able to show that I'm interested in being part of the legal community and getting to know people. It just kind of adds to me being a well-rounded person, I think. And so what I would recommend to anyone who's thinking about getting involved with the Inns of Court, do it, because it's a really, really great way to add to your CV, but also it's really fun. Like we had a great time, didn't we? So
We did.
yeah, cumulatively, those experiences helped with applications a lot.
Yeah, because I recognize that you would have spoken about ages as well, and also your experience working in a bar. And most of the time, as you rightfully pointed out, many people seem to think, well, it's not really legal experience, so maybe I shouldn't write it down. But there's so many transferable skills that you can highlight when you note those kind of things. So, Grace, did you find that throughout your time studying and or even working, did you find that there were any other extracurricular activities, and it literally doesn't even have to be within the law, that you undertook that you think also made you a very strong applicant?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest hobbies, which I spoke about more than anything in pupillage applications and interviews, was volunteering. I I've done all sorts of volunteering. I think I volunteered in a primary school for about a couple of years. I did a charity trip to Peru where I worked in a school with underprivileged children and orphans. You know, I was able to use that as an experience of working with people from different backgrounds, for example. Um, and during the bar course year, when people weren't really getting out much, I decided to raise some money for domestic abuse stops here. I did a lot of walking and running to reach my target, and people donated to me, which allowed me to show that I not only enjoy doing these things as my hobbies, but I'm also committed to working hard for causes that I believe in. So I think volunteering is a fantastic way overall to show that there's more to you than just legal experiences, that you have interests. You know, you like going away on trips and traveling and doing things like that and getting involved and doing your bit for the community. I think that can be a really good way to pad out your CV. It was just, I've had some of the most fantastic experiences volunteering. Within sort of the realm of volunteering, I guess I should talk about Vocalize and Griffin Law. They're two programs that I did through Gray's Inn. I'm sure a lot of people will have heard of them, but if not, I'll just briefly explain that Vocalize is where you undertake a series of workshops to learn how to teach male prisoners key debating skills. It's really part of a rehabilitation program for them. And then you can get the opportunity to go into these prisons and actually teach those skills and run little mini debates with them. And then Griffin Law is quite similar, but it is working with sixth form students instead, ones who are particularly interested in law, and running little mock trials with them. And I think that, as an extracurricular activity, it helped me so much because not only could I talk about it in my applications, but the process of teaching and practicing advocacy skills with other people, it naturally makes you a better advocate. That's what I found anyway. It really helped me. It made me more confident with my public speaking. So I think that was a fantastic thing to do. And again, really, really recommend it if anyone's interested or thinking about it. And then just generally speaking, I think having hobbies, having passions, that is always important. If you have them, put them in your application. If you don't have them, try and find something that makes you happy, not just for your pupillage application, but to better yourself and make yourself as happy as you can be. So, for example, at university, I did rowing and coxing. Like, Nia, I am not going to lie, I was not overly competitive. Like, I cannot put on my applications that I was this great world class rower and that I won all of these competitions, because that's not true. But I could point to something I'd done at university, say how much I'd enjoyed it, and find skills that I'd learned from it, like teamwork or communication skills. And it helps. Anything where you're developing skills, it helps. So again, it kind of comes back to the thing we were talking about with the job at the bar. Don't underestimate the value of something for your pupillage application, because 9 times out of 10, there probably is some sort of transferable skill that you can mention.
That's wonderful advice, Grace. Now we've actually come to the section of the episode where people are really going to be listening keenly because we're going to speak about pupillage advice. Now we know that the gateway closes very soon on the 9th of February, so we're going to go through a series of questions and get Grace's response really on how to approach these things and how to fine tune your applications. Now, why did you choose to apply for a common law pupillage? Because I know that many applicants right now are still a bit confused or need a bit of assistance on the kind of reasoning they should be thinking about when answering these kind of questions.
Yeah, well, I think the main benefit for me of a common law pupillage was that I was at a point where I wasn't entirely sure what area of law I wanted to practice in. Therefore, from my pupillage, I wanted to keep gaining experience in different areas. Um, and obviously, with a common law pupillage, you get access to three wide and varying areas of law, that being civil law, crime, and family. And within those, you also get great exposure to courtroom advocacy. Now, for me, it was really important that I was entering a pupillage where I wouldn't just be doing paper-based advocacy, for example. I wanted some experience of being in court at least a few times a week, being able to witness other people's advocacy. And yeah, especially with family and crime, that's really a large majority of it. So that was important for me. But also, I haven't completely shut myself off to the paper-based advocacy side of things. So that's where civil comes into play. And I mean, what I'll say is I'm now 15 weeks into my pupillage, and I have a very strong inclination towards family law. But what people keep reminding me of is that, well, you haven't actually done much civil or crime yet. And that's true, because I'm just starting my civil section now. I'm then going to do my crime section. And the beauty of a common law pupillage is that I'm getting to explore all these different areas and not have to make my mind up about something yet. But I'm still underway with my career and progressing. So for me, it's brilliant, and it's only going to have the benefit of making me a well-rounded advocate at the end of it. So I think that's another really good benefit of a common law pupillage.
And do you think that persons that are contemplating applying for common law pupillages should have a specific kind of experience to kind of show the breadth of the areas that they're interested? Do you think that's mandatory?
Um, I'd say that in any pupillage application, you need experiences that demonstrate high intellect, you're a hardworking individual, you have excellent advocacy skills, both written and oral. You need that in all pupillage applications, really. What I'd say is extremely relevant for a common law pupillage application is demonstrating an ability and experiences of working with people from all different types of backgrounds. Because you're working in different areas of law, you're going to meet a lot of different people, especially with things like family and crime. You're dealing with people going through the most intensely private and sensitive matters in their life. It is so paramount that you are able to act with empathy and sensitivity, discretion. So when I think back to my pupillage applications, a key example I used was that I'd done some training where I was trained to work for a call service for people in times of crisis or going through a difficult time. So I was able to show how through that experience I'd learned the skills to deal with quite difficult and sensitive matters. You then got to flip that and think, well, what's another important skill? It's not carrying the weight of what you've dealt with at work on your shoulders. It's being able to emotionally detach yourself. So it's those things kind of contradict one another, but it's finding the balance between those. And I think that's a really important skill for common law pupillage applications. And then on top of that, to cover all bases, examples of an analytical mind, working under high pressure, because if you're doing a common law pupillage, you're going to be asked to switch from one area of law to another overnight. You're going to get different briefs at different times, and that can be quite difficult. You've got to be able to switch off from one thing and pick up another, if that makes sense. So if you can find examples of where you've been able to work under that kind of high pressure, definitely include them.
And given that the gateway is closing so soon, do you think that there are some top tips that people should apply to this written stage? Because it's the first stage of the application process.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I know that most people will have got various drafts of their written applications now, and it's not always the best thing to hear loads of advice saying, do this, do that. But I'd say top 3 tips for that would be use the word count. It sounds silly, but a lot of people don't always think it's necessary to use the word count given. I'll explain it a bit better in that don't waffle on for the sake of it. You need to be concise. That's an important skill of a barrister. But on questions such as, why should we pick you? Or why us as a chambers? I think a marker of that application would seriously question why you've not used as much of the word count as you can, because you're trying to sell yourself or you're trying to persuade that chambers that you belong there, that you deserve that pupillage. And I think if you're struggling, especially let's say with the why this chambers, if you're struggling to answer that question, first of all, it might be an indicator that you haven't done enough research. So go back and do some more. I'd say top tip for that would be look at their social media pages. I know a few people have probably already mentioned that, but you can find so much on their Twitter, or even just find out about recent cases their members have been involved in. Just anything that you can talk about, it will add value to your answer. But yeah, use the word count where on questions where you really should be saying as much as you can. Then second top tip, make every word impactful. It should be a piece of persuasive art. It should be a piece of advocacy in and of itself. Each and every word has to have an impact. Don't go spewing up a thesaurus and make your answers sound ridiculous, but be articulate whilst also being concise. And then third tip would be limit how many people review your applications. I'd say 1 or 2 maximum. Any more, and the advice you get will be confusing and conflicting, and you don't know what to do then. So especially now, I think people will be getting to the stage where they're having their applications reviewed. It can be tempting to ask everyone to, oh, please, can you have a look at this and send it back to me? I don't think that's useful. 1 or 2 people that you really trust, and ideally at least one of them has an idea of the law or is a barrister, for example, that would be the most helpful way to go about reviewing applications.
Grace, that final point, you don't hear that discussed a lot, because actually you don't hear it discussed a lot with the perspective or the nuance that you just highlighted. Most of the time, people
Mm.
say, get it reviewed, reviewed, reviewed. But I absolutely agree with that point because I find once you go past 2, you're actually more overwhelmed, confused, conflicted, and stressed out because you're actually wondering, you're debating now with yourself, okay, whose advice should I take about this question? I don't know. I think it also puts you in a worse position actually. So I really do think that especially at this critical stage where you're soon about to press that submit button, that you don't need many cooks. I always hear that saying back at home, too many cooks spoil the broth. So I think that's very, very applicable here as well. Now, as applicants fine tune their applications for the final submission, do you think that aside from those tips, there's anything else they can do to make themselves memorable and stand out from other applicants?
I think the best way to make yourself memorable is to let your personality come through, which is easier said than done on paper. You're going to get the situation where hundreds of applicants are applying to a chambers and they're all similarly highly intelligent people with amazing grades and legal work experience. So you need to take the time to say what makes you stand out from those other candidates. For example, and I think this can be quite a controversial one, but I think if you've experienced a particular hardship or a difficulty in your life that you've had to overcome on your journey to success or to get to where you are now, then write about it. There'll be some questions in pupillage applications that are designed to elicit that information from you, but there aren't always. If you can find a place to write about it, include it because it's an important part of who you are and it shows what makes you different. It shows what you've gone through and how you've got to where you are. And I think that's what makes people memorable, the little pieces of them, not just how they can achieve top grades in certain modules. I mean, obviously, be succinct about it and to a certain extent reserved. You can't reel off your entire life story on a pupillage application, but it's important to mention when it's a part of who you are. And then I'd say that the second way I'd recommend making yourself memorable is to mention names if you know them. So let's call it name dropping, because again, I think this is also controversial. I've heard people asking, should I be name dropping in an application? And people are going to have different opinions about it. But in my opinion, if you've met someone, if you've had a genuine conversation with them about life at the bar or that chambers, for example, or you've shadowed them on a mini pupillage, that is a legitimate experience that you're allowed to talk about and you're allowed to put that name in your application. So put it down, explain why that experience demonstrated that chambers to be a friendly place where you'd like to work, and that's going to help you be a memorable applicant. They're going to think, oh, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. She included the name of that member. So yeah, that will always help.
Before we talk about the interview stage, is there anything else that you think comes to mind uh, as a last minute finishing touch on those written applications that you think persons viewing should know? Is there anything, if there's anything that they must take away from what you've said so far about the written stage, is there anything you want to highlight?
I'd say at this stage, my last minute absolute do is review your own applications. So I warned off getting too many other people to review your applications, but read them through and do it every day up until you submit them, because you will keep noticing little mistakes. I had the situation where I sent some of my written applications off, and when it came to reviewing them for interviews, I could see grammatical and spelling mistakes, and I couldn't understand how I was so angry because I had reviewed them so many times, but you will always find more. So just keep looking through them, spell check them, and maybe first thing when you wake up, have a glance at a new one with fresh eyes. Doing it when you're tired isn't always the best thing.
Thanks, Grace.